Here's what I'm looking at right now. Canada, the country Americans make jokes about. The polite neighbor, the maple syrup, the hockey teams. That Canada just handed Washington the most embarrassing trade defeat in modern American history. Not China, not Russia, Canada. And it wasn't even close. Trump threatened the biggest trade war in North American history. He promised it would bring Canada to its knees within days. He said publicly on camera that Canada had no cards to play, and then the whole thing blew up in his face spectacularly, irreversibly, and in full view of the entire world. Within hours of the damage becoming undeniable, Warren Buffett broke his legendary silence with a statement that Wall Street is calling the most brutal economic autopsy of a trade policy ever delivered by a living investor. And when you see the numbers, how many billions in American wealth just evaporated? How many U.S. industries are now scrambling to survive? What Canada is quietly doing with the leverage Trump accidentally handed them? You'll understand why economists across the political spectrum are saying this isn't just a policy mistake. This is the most catastrophic miscalculation in modern American trade history. And the most humiliating part? Canada saw it coming. They were ready. They had been ready for over a year. Hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to walk you through is going to change how you think about everything. Trade, power, economic warfare, and what it actually means to win. Let's go back to where this started. 3 weeks ago, Trump stood in the Rose Garden, flanked by his trade advisors and a row of perfectly arranged American flags. The cameras were rolling, and Trump announced the most aggressive tariff package ever directed at a single allied nation in modern American history. 25% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, 20% on lumber, 15% on dairy, agricultural products, and auto parts, and a 10% blanket tariff on all remaining Canadian imports. Total value of goods affected, over $400 billion in annual bilateral trade, the largest tariff action against a single country since the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930. Trump's language was vintage, casual, dismissive. Canada's been ripping us off for decades, he said. They send their lumber down here. They send their oil. They take our money. They'll come to the table. They'll make a deal, and it'll be a great deal for us. Behind the scenes, the confidence was even more absolute. Trump's trade team had modeled what they called a capitulation timeline. They predicted Canada would resist publicly for 72 hours, maybe a week, before Ottawa came crawling back to negotiate on American terms. One senior advisor reportedly told colleagues, "This is the easiest win we'll ever have. Canada has no cards to play." On paper, the math supported that confidence. The United States economy is roughly 10 times the size of Canada's. Canada sends approximately 75% of its total exports to the United States. Betting markets gave Canada virtually zero chance of winning a sustained trade conflict. Everyone agreed Canada had no leverage. Canada would do what Canada always does: negotiate quietly, compromise politely, and accept whatever terms the bigger partner dictates. But what Trump didn't know, what nobody in Washington seemed to realize, was that Canada had been preparing for this exact moment for over a year. Announcement number 1. Canada didn't panic. Canada punched back. Within 72 hours of Trump's Rose Garden announcement, Ottawa unveiled a retaliatory tariff package so precisely targeted that trade analysts on 3 continents called it the most strategically sophisticated retaliation in modern trade history. Canada didn't just slap random tariffs on American goods. They targeted products from the most politically sensitive states in America, the exact states Trump needed. 25% tariffs on Kentucky bourbon, Mitch McConnell's backyard, where the whiskey industry supports over 20,000 jobs, 20% on Wisconsin dairy, a swing state Trump won by fewer than 23,000 votes. 30% on Pennsylvania steel, the state that delivered Trump the presidency in 2016. 20% on Iowa and Nebraska agricultural exports, corn, soybeans, pork, the heartland, Trump's core base. Canada also targeted Florida orange juice, Tennessee whiskey, North Carolina furniture, and Ohio manufacturing components. Every single product was chosen not for its economic significance to Canada, but for its political significance to the Republican Party. Every single tariff was designed to cause maximum political pain where Trump was most vulnerable. This wasn't an economic response. This was a political operation executed with military precision. Trump saw a punching bag. Canada saw a chessboard. Received. Announcement number 1 received. Announcement number 2. The energy card. Canada supplies approximately 60% of all crude oil imported by the United States. Let me say that again. 60%, not 10, not 20, 60. Canada also supplies roughly half of America's natural gas imports. The pipelines carrying Canadian energy into the United States are not optional infrastructure. They are the arteries that keep American refineries running, American homes heated through winter, American factories powered, and American gas stations supplied from Michigan to Montana. When Ottawa signaled it was prepared to impose export levies on energy shipments, not a cutoff, just a carefully calibrated tax raising the cost of every barrel of Canadian crude entering American refineries by 8 to 12%, the entire dynamic of the trade war shifted instantly. It was like watching a chess game where one player suddenly reveals they've had a queen hidden behind a pawn the entire time. Oil futures spiked within hours. West Texas Intermediate crude jumped over 6% in a single trading session, the largest single-day move not caused by a war or natural disaster in over 3 years. American refineries in the Midwest, physically engineered to process heavy Canadian crude and unable to simply switch to alternatives without billions in infrastructure modifications, sent urgent letters to the White House warning of potential fuel shortages and refinery shutdowns within weeks. You can survive without Canadian lumber. Your housing costs go up, but you survive. You can survive without Canadian aluminum. You cannot survive without Canadian energy. Not quickly, not cheaply, not without economic pain that would make the tariffs look like a rounding error. And everyone in Ottawa knew it. They'd known it for years. They built their entire retaliation strategy around it. Trump assumed Canada had no options. He said it publicly. The whole time, Canada had been sitting on the single most powerful economic leverage point in the entire bilateral relationship. Received. Announcement number 2 received. Announcement number 3, and nobody saw this one coming. While Trump was tweeting about trade deficits at 2 a.m, Canadian trade officials were on planes. Brussels, Tokyo, London, Canberra, New Delhi. They deepened Canada's commitment to CETA, giving Canadian exporters preferential access to a market of 450 million European consumers. They expanded participation in the CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership the United States walked away from, now covering 11 nations and over 500 million consumers. They negotiated a new bilateral agreement with the United Kingdom, and they opened exploratory talks with India, South Korea, and Southeast Asian nations, sending one clear signal to the world: Canada is open for business, and it doesn't need permission from Washington. By the time the tariffs hit, Canada had pre-negotiated alternative buyers for its lumber, its wheat, its canola, its manufactured goods. Canadian lumber companies had already signed preliminary contracts with European construction firms. Canadian farmers had already locked in export agreements with Japanese and South Korean distributors. The pain of losing American market access would be real, but it wouldn't be fatal, because Canada had spent a year making sure the United States was no longer its only option. That single strategic decision, diversify before the crisis, not during it, is what ultimately won the trade war before it even started. Trump brought a sledgehammer. Canada brought a scalpel. The scalpel won, received. Announcement number 3 received. If this analysis is making sense to you, hit like right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need to understand what's actually happening here. And drop a comment below. Did you see this coming? I read every single one. And then Warren Buffett stepped to the microphone. And the last illusion that Trump's trade war was anything other than a catastrophe was shattered. Buffett was at a Berkshire Hathaway shareholders event in Omaha when a CNBC reporter asked him about the trade situation with Canada. The 94-year-old billionaire paused, removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly with his tie, and then he delivered a response that financial networks replayed on a loop for the rest of the week. Trade wars are sold as strength, Buffett said. They're actually confessions of weakness. A country that has to threaten its neighbors to get a good deal is a country that can't compete on its own merits. And a leader who thinks tariffs are paid by the other country has failed economics at the most basic level imaginable. The room went still, not quiet, still. Tariffs are not paid by Canada. Tariffs are paid by American importers, American manufacturers, and American consumers. Every dollar of these tariffs comes out of American pockets. This is not a theory. This is not a partisan opinion. This is arithmetic. And apparently arithmetic is no longer a requirement for setting trade policy in the United States of America. He paused, took a sip of his cherry Coke. I've been investing for 70 years. What I've never seen is a government deliberately make its own products more expensive, alienate its own trading partners, destabilize its own supply chains, and then call it a victory. That's not bad policy. That's economic self-harm. Then Buffett revealed that Berkshire Hathaway had already begun repositioning its portfolio. We've shifted capital away from sectors with significant cross-border exposure. When government policy becomes this erratic, this divorced from economic reality, capital doesn't fight. It doesn't argue. It leaves. It finds somewhere more rational to go. And right now, rational is not the word I would use to describe American trade policy. Asked directly about Canada's response, his verdict was final. Canada played this perfectly. They were patient, they were strategic, and they understood something that apparently escaped the entire White House trade team. In economics, the person who needs the deal less always wins. Canada spent a year making sure they needed this deal less. That's not luck. That's preparation. That's competence. And it stands in rather stark contrast to what we've seen from Washington. Money doesn't have a flag. It goes where it's treated well. And right now, according to the most successful investor in the history of American capitalism, it's leaving the United States. But the tariffs were only the beginning of the damage. Within the first 2 weeks, as documented by Bloomberg and the Peterson Institute for International Economics, the cascading damage became impossible to ignore. Lumber prices spiked 22%, adding an estimated $14,000 to the cost of building a new American home. Gas prices in the Midwest rose 31 cents per gallon in 10 days, with analysts projecting further increases of up to 70 cents heading into winter. Auto parts crossing the border carried a 20% surcharge immediately passed on to buyers. The average price of a new American car increased by over $2,000 in a single month. The average American household is now paying between $1,800 and $2,400 more per year as a direct result of these tariffs. Not Canadian households, American households. Ford warned the tariffs would force price increases across its entire North American lineup. General Motors announced a hiring freeze at 3 Michigan facilities. The National Association of Home Builders projected that lumber tariffs alone would price over 300,000 families out of the housing market. The American Farm Bureau Federation, an organization that endorsed Trump twice, reported that retaliatory Canadian tariffs had already cost American agricultural exporters over $2 billion in lost contracts in just 3 weeks. A soybean farmer in Iowa named Dale Reinhardt went viral when he posted a video from his tractor holding up a stack of canceled purchase orders from Canadian buyers. "I voted for the man," he said, his voice shaking. "These tariffs aren't helping me. They're killing me." His own base, destroyed by his own policy. The damage isn't just economic, it's strategic, and it may be permanent. America's closest allies are watching what happened to Canada and drawing the obvious conclusion. If the United States will do this to its closest ally, its largest trading partner, its partner in NATO and NORAD and Five Eyes, then no alliance is safe. No trade agreement can be trusted. The EU accelerated trade diversification negotiations immediately. EU Trade Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis issued a statement using the diplomatic euphemism, "We must prepare for a trading environment in which traditional assumptions about transatlantic cooperation may no longer hold." In Brussels, that is the equivalent of screaming. Japan initiated contingency planning for potential U.S. tariff actions. Australia, South Korea, and the United Kingdom all signaled they were reassessing the reliability of American trade commitments. New trade agreements are being signed globally at a pace not seen since World War II. And the one thing all of them have in common is that the United States is not at the table. And while Trump was busy attacking Canada, China was watching and smiling and taking notes. Beijing has spent years arguing that America is unreliable, that it changes its mind every 4 years, uses trade as a weapon against its own friends. Trump just proved Beijing's pitch right. Countries that were on the fence about deepening ties with Beijing are now accelerating those conversations. Chinese state media wasted no time presenting every piece of damage from this trade war as proof of systemic American decline. This is the strategic cost that doesn't show up in quarterly GDP figures. It shows up in meetings happening right now in capitals around the world without American diplomats in the room. Let me give you two paths forward. Path one, de-escalation. If Trump walks back the most aggressive tariffs, if both sides agree to a negotiated pause, it's possible to stabilize the situation, not reverse it. The diversification deals Canada signed won't be undone. The trust damage with European and Asian allies won't be magically restored, but the active bleeding could stop. The condition: someone in Washington has to publicly acknowledge the policy failed. Based on everything we've seen, that is not an easy condition to meet. Path two, the spiral. If the tariffs hold, if the energy levies take full effect heading into winter, if American households see their energy bills spike by the amounts analysts are projecting, if the farm crisis deepens, then you have the conditions for a genuine economic rupture between two countries that have been each other's most important partners for generations. Here's what I think. Canada executed a near-perfect strategic response to an aggressive and poorly conceived policy. Whether or not the immediate crisis resolves, the underlying lesson is already written into the history books. The United States attacked its closest ally with economic weapons and lost. That is not a sentence that has ever been written before, and it will not be easily forgotten. Warren Buffett said it best, and I'll end with his words: the person who needs the deal less always wins. Canada spent a year making sure they needed this deal less. That is a lesson about preparation, about patience, about what real leverage looks like when you've built it quietly and played it at exactly the right time. So let me ask you three questions. Leave your answers in the comments. First, do you think this trade war ends in a negotiated deal, or has the damage already gone too far? Second, Canada clearly had a strategy. Does the United States have one, or is this improvisation all the way down? And third, when the dust settles, which country comes out of this stronger? Subscribe to Daly Brief if you haven't. Hit the bell. Come back for the next one, because this story is not over. Not even close.